Do you live in North Maluku? Do you live in Tobelo, in Galela, in Kau, in Solfafi, in Ternate, on the island of Halmahera, or anywhere across the broad sweep of eastern Indonesia, where the ground shook on the morning of Friday, July 3rd, 2026? Do you live in a village on the northern peninsula of Halmahera, where stilted bamboo houses lean toward the water, where outrigger canoes are pulled onto beaches fringed by coconut palms, where your family has lived on this volcanic island for generations, and where the Earth has always reminded you, periodically and without warning, that it has its own schedule and its own priorities? Then, what happened at 11:31 in the morning local time on Friday, when the ground beneath the waters west of Tobelo suddenly ruptured along a fault more than 100 kilometers below the surface, is something you felt with your body before you ever heard the news. And you knew, the way people in earthquake country always know, that it was not a small one. At 02:31 UTC on July 3rd, 2026, 11:31 a.m. local time in North Maluku, the USGS recorded a magnitude 6.2 earthquake with its epicenter located 58 kilometers west of Tobelo, the capital of the North Halmahera Regency in North Maluku Province, Indonesia. The depth, 129 kilometers. The coordinates, 18205 degrees north latitude, 127, 4916 degrees east longitude. Detected by a global network of seismic stations, confirmed by the USGS, reviewed and finalized by a USGS seismologist, the data is exact. Magnitude 6.2. Intermediate depth, 58 kilometers offshore. And the shaking it produced reached the island of Halmahera, reached the city of Ternate more than 100 kilometers to the southwest, and was felt by a resident there who was sitting having coffee at a roadside stall when his chair began to rock. He panicked for a moment, he told the AFP news agency, because he is still traumatized by past earthquakes. That statement, simple, human, 3 seconds of a man reaching for the table to steady himself while his chair moved, tells you more about what this region lives with than any tectonic model ever could. 4 hours and 46 minutes later at 04:17 UTC, the ground moved again. A magnitude 4. 6 earthquake struck 78 kilometers west of Tobelo at a depth of 89, 0 kilometers. The epicenter, coordinates 1, 6511 degrees north, 127, 3076 degrees east. Detected by 50 seismic stations with good location accuracy, assigned a USGS significance rating of 326. The aftershock of the magnitude 6. 2 main shock that had struck less than 5 hours earlier. 2 events, 1 morning, a main shock at 120. 9 kilometers depth and an aftershock at 89. 0 kilometers depth, both at intermediate depth within the descending slab of oceanic plate that is slowly, relentlessly driving itself downward into the mantle beneath the Halmahera region. And beneath all of it, a tectonic setting so complex, so layered with competing forces, so unusual in the entire global catalog of earthquake geology, that scientists have spent decades trying to fully describe what is happening at depth in this part of the world. Indonesia is the most seismically active country on Earth. Not one of the most seismically active. The most. The United States Geological Survey has ranked it this way explicitly, and the seismic catalog bears that out. Based on USGS records, Indonesia has experienced more than 150 earthquakes at magnitude 7, 0 or above in the period from 1901 to 2019 alone. More than 150 major earthquakes in 118 years in a single country. That is more than 1 every year on average, and those are only the magnitude 7 and above events. The hundreds of magnitude 5 and magnitude 6 events that occur across the Indonesian archipelago every year, shaking communities on Sumatra, Java, Sulawesi, the Banda Sea Islands, Halmahera, and the outer Ark Islands in between. Those are simply the background noise of living on the world's most tectonically active nation. And within that nation, the region of North Maluku, the province of nearly 400 islands that includes Halmahera, Ternate, Tidore, Morotai, and the surrounding waters, sits at the intersection of some of the most complicated and energetic plate boundary interactions anywhere on the surface of this planet. Let us talk about exactly what is happening geologically beneath the waters west of Tobelo, because understanding the depth of this morning's main shock, 129 kilometers, is the key to understanding everything else about it. The USGS description of this event is precise. It is an intermediate depth earthquake, and its offshore location combined with that depth is characteristic of seismicity along a descending slab. A descending slab. That phrase points to a specific geological process called subduction, and in the waters surrounding Halmahera, that process is happening in a way that is unlike anywhere else on Earth. Here is the problem. The tectonic setting of the Molucca Sea, the body of water that sits just to the west of Halmahera and that forms the broader geological context for today's main shock, is the only known example in the world of an active arc-arc collision consuming an oceanic basin via subduction in two opposite directions simultaneously. That sentence needs to be unpacked carefully because it sounds like technical language, but it describes something physically extraordinary that is happening in real time beneath the waters of this region right now. To the west of the Molucca Sea, the Sangihe arc is subducting the Molucca Sea plate eastward, pulling oceanic crust down beneath itself and toward Halmahera. To the east, the Halmahera arc is subducting that same Molucca Sea plate westward, pulling the same plate down from the other direction. Two island arc systems on opposite sides of the same small oceanic basin, both consuming it from opposite directions. The Molucca Sea is being devoured from two sides at once. Scientists call this the Molucca Sea Collision Zone, and it is unique on the surface of the Earth. There is no other place quite like it. And today's M6.2 main shock at 120, 9 kilometers depth, occurred within the descending slab that this extraordinary double subduction system has created. The Philippine Sea Plate, which is the larger regional driver of the tectonic forces at work in this part of Indonesia, moves westward with respect to the Sunda Plate, the core of the Eurasian continental mass, at a velocity of approximately 107 millimeters per year. The Australia Plate, pushing northward, moves at about 76 millimeters per year relative to Sunda. These are not slow forces in geological terms. They are fast. The energy these plate motions accumulate and periodically release is what fills the seismic catalog of North Maluku with decades of magnitude 5, 6, 7, and occasionally 8 and larger events. The convergence among the Australia, Sunda, Philippine Sea, and Pacific plates in this region is taken up by a complex system of smaller microplate motions, the Halmahera Plate, the Sangihe Plate, the Bird's Head microplate further south, that carve the seismicity into a three-dimensional fabric of faults, slabs, and collision boundaries extending from the seafloor down to depths exceeding 600 kilometers. And now it gets worse, or rather, more precisely described, because the North Maluku region has a recent history that makes this morning's events impossible to see in isolation. On April 2nd, 2026, just 3 months before today's main shock, a magnitude 7.4 earthquake, reported by Indonesian agency BMKG as an M7.6, struck the Molucca Sea between North Sulawesi and North Maluku provinces, with its epicenter near the Batang-Dua Islands at a depth of 35 kilometers. That shallow event was catastrophic in its local impact. 1 person was killed when a sports center collapsed in Manado, 4 others were injured, and more than 450 structures were damaged or destroyed, the majority on the Batang-Dua Islands, where 1,366 people were displaced. 104 homes collapsed outright, and 85 others were moderately damaged. A tsunami of up to 0. 75 meters was recorded in 5 coastal areas following that earthquake. 6 churches, a school, and 2 public facilities were destroyed. 23 homes on Ternate Island were damaged. Across Halmahera, bridges and buildings cracked. The BMKG logged 378 aftershocks in the first week following that April event alone. This region was still absorbing the structural and psychological after effects of a magnitude 7.4 event when this morning's magnitude 6.2 struck. This next part matters because the depth difference between these 2 events tells you something important about the different types of earthquakes this region produces and why their hazard profiles differ so dramatically. The April 2026 M7.4 struck at a depth of 35 kilometers, classified as shallow. Today's M6.2 struck at 120, 9 kilometers, classified as intermediate. This distinction is not cosmetic. It is physically fundamental. Shallow earthquakes concentrate their energy release close to the surface, where it has less rock to travel through, before it reaches the communities above it. A magnitude 6.2 at 10 kilometers depth produces dramatically more intense ground shaking at the surface than a magnitude 6.2 at 120 kilometers depth, because the seismic waves from the shallow event have already arrived at their most powerful before the distance has allowed them to spread out and lose energy. The April M7.4 at 35 kilometers was dangerous, partly because of its shallow depth combined with its proximity to populated islands. Today's M6.2 at 120. 9 kilometers is a fundamentally different type of event. Intermediate depth, with its energy source buried deep within the subducting slab, its ground motion attenuated by more than 100 kilometers of rock before it ever reaches the seafloor and the island surface above it. The USGS pager system assessed today's M6.2 and assigned it a green alert, the lowest tier, for shaking-related fatalities and economic losses, signaling that no significant casualties or damage are expected. The maximum shaking on the modified Mercalli intensity scale reached approximately 4.5, considered moderate. A small number of observers submitted felt reports to the USGS. Did you feel it? System. Just 6 initial reports in the first hours after the event. This is consistent with what intermediate depth earthquakes in offshore settings typically produce, a widely felt but not intensely damaging event for the communities on the nearest island. You feel it. Your chair rocks if you are sitting at a roadside coffee stall in Ternate, 114 kilometers from the epicenter, as Umar Abbas experienced. But the building around you does not crack, the walls do not fail, the roof does not come down. But most people are missing what makes even a green alert intermediate depth earthquake in the specific region significant beyond the immediate ground motion assessment. Because Tobelo is not simply a dot on a map. It is a city, the second largest in all of North Maluku province, with a population of 34,150 at the 2020 census. It is the administrative capital of the North Halmahera Regency, a regency of 207,623 people as of mid-2025. It is the export hub for copra, dried coconut flesh, from the vast coconut plantations that cover the northern peninsula of Halmahera, shipping hundreds of tons of product monthly to the ports of Bitong in North Sulawesi and Surabaya in East Java. It has a hospital, a port, a post office, a coastline of fishing villages where outrigger canoes go out for tuna and prawns in the reef shallows, using traditions older than the Indonesian nation itself. It has communities where 75% of the population depends on agriculture for their livelihood, working coconut and clove plantations across 55,000 hectares of the Regency. It has a cultural fabric, the Hibo Alamo, the ancient pact between Muslim and Christian communities to live together without aggression, that survived sectarian violence in 1999 and 2000, that killed hundreds and displaced more than 100,000 people across the broader Maluku region. This is a city with history, with economy, with real families who felt the ground move this morning. And the history of what larger earthquakes have done to this region is written clearly enough in the recent record that no one who studies it can look at today's events without understanding the broader risk context. On July 14th, 2019, a magnitude 7.3 earthquake, reported by BMKG as M6.2, struck southern Halmahera at a depth of just 10 kilometers. That shallow event was a different kind of animal entirely from today's intermediate depth main shock. The 2019 earthquake displaced more than 50,000 people. It killed 14 people and injured 129 others. It produced a small, non-destructive tsunami wave of 20 centimeters at the tide gauge near Labuha. It inflicted a total of over 238 billion, approximately 16 million US dollars, in damage across the affected area. In Yeoman Village on Geronga Island, near the epicenter, all 164 houses belonging to the community were completely destroyed by the shaking, forcing all 686 residents to evacuate to the mountain behind the village. Roads blocked by fallen debris prevented rescue teams from reaching entire communities for days. Electrical systems across South Halmahera failed. The North Maluku government declared a 7-day state of emergency. The 2019 event was M6.2 at 10 kilometers depth. Today's event is M6.2 at 109 kilometers depth. These are fundamentally different scenarios, and the difference in the green alert assessment for today versus what a shallow M7 plus event would produce in the same region is not a matter of semantics. It is a physical reality rooted in the geometry of how seismic energy propagates. And yet the fact that Halmahera, just 3 years ago, produced a magnitude 7, a 2 that displaced 50,000 people, and in April of this very year produced a magnitude 7, 4 that damaged or destroyed 450 structures across the North Maluku region, is context that no one living on this island can afford to set aside simply because today's event is classified green. Let us talk about the aftershock that followed today's main shock, because the M6 that struck at 04:17 UTC carries specific data worth examining carefully. It struck 78 kilometers west of Tobelo, 20 kilometers further offshore than the main shock's epicenter of 58 kilometers west. Its depth was 89, 0 kilometers, shallower than the main shock's 129 kilometers. A magnitude 4, 6 earthquake releases seismic energy equivalent to roughly 120 metric tons of TNT, according to the USGS. Empirical fault scaling laws estimate the subsurface rupture length at approximately 899 meters, less than 1 kilometer of fault surface slipping to produce this aftershock. The USGS event ID for this aftershock is US6000T9SK, and it was detected by 50 seismic stations. One person submitted a felt report to the USGS Did You Feel It? System. One person, in the region surrounding the aftershock, felt it enough to take the time to report it. That number, not 0, but only 1, gives you a concrete sense of how limited the surface expression of an intermediate depth M4. 6 is in a region where even moderate surface shaking has become so common that many people no longer bother to report individual felt earthquakes. This is where it becomes serious in a way that goes beyond the technical parameters. Because the experience of earthquake country, real earthquake country, the kind that North Maluku represents, is not the experience of individual events evaluated in isolation. It is the experience of accumulation. It is the experience of a man at a coffee stall whose chair starts rocking and who panics, not because a magnitude 6. 2 at 120 kilometers depth is intrinsically terrifying, but because he is already traumatized by past earthquakes. Because he was there in 2019. Because he felt the April 2026 M7. 4. Because he has watched his neighbors rebuild after events that destroyed their homes. Because in North Maluku, an earthquake is never just an earthquake. It is the latest chapter in a story that has been running since long before any living person was born, written in faults and subducting slabs and tectonic collisions that will continue long after anyone alive today is gone. The Halmahera subduction zone, the convergent boundary along the eastern side of the Molucca Sea, where the Molucca Sea Plate is being consumed beneath Halmahera, has been the source of 115 earthquakes exceeding magnitude 6. 0 in the recorded seismic catalog, according to USGS data cited by Wikipedia's account of the North Maluku tectonic setting. 115 events at M6 or above. From a single subduction system in a single region of a single island, the current event, today's M6.2, is number 116. Or perhaps slightly higher if the catalog has been updated since that figure was last compiled. The point is that this morning's earthquake is not anomalous in the context of Halmahera's seismic history. It is precisely what this region does. It is precisely what the subduction zone beneath these waters has always done and will continue to do. The question that matters for the people of North Halmahera Regency is not whether earthquakes will continue, they will, but how well prepared the infrastructure, the early warning systems, the emergency response capacity, and the community knowledge of this region are for the larger events that the same fault system is fully capable of producing. Indonesia's national agency, BMKG, stated clearly that today's M6.2 posed no tsunami threat. This assessment is consistent with what we know about the mechanism of intermediate depth earthquakes. Tsunamis are most efficiently generated by shallow thrust earthquakes, events where large areas of the seafloor are suddenly uplifted or dropped by fault motion near the surface, displacing the overlying water column. Intermediate depth earthquakes at 120 kilometers below the seafloor, even at magnitude 6, 2, do not produce the kind of sudden large area seafloor deformation needed to generate significant tsunami waves. The absence of a tsunami threat today is a direct consequence of the earthquake's depth. The same event at 15 kilometers depth, closer to the surface, with different fault geometry, could be a different story entirely. And yet, the combination of today's MM6, 2 main shock, and the M4, 6 aftershock. 4 hours and 46 minutes later illustrates something about the nature of aftershock sequences in this region that the USGS is careful to communicate clearly. Aftershock sequences from the M4. 6 event can continue for several days and gradually diminish over time. The M6. 2th main shock itself is capable of generating further aftershocks, potentially including events in the magnitude 5 range or above, in the hours, days, and weeks following the main rupture. The USGS aftershock probability models for magnitude 6. 2 main shocks suggest that within the first week following such an event, there's a statistically meaningful probability of 1 or more aftershocks at magnitude 5, 0 or above. For communities on the northern peninsula of Halmahera that felt this morning's main shock, the instruction is clear and consistent across every major seismological authority. Remain alert for aftershocks, especially during the first 72 hours, and avoid entering structures that may have sustained damage. The Tobelo Hospital, the regional hospital for North Halmahera Regency, will be monitoring for injury reports. The BMKG network of seismometers across North Maluku will be recording every tremor that follows the main shock, feeding data to analysts who watch aftershock sequences and assess whether any event in the coming days warrants a higher level hazard advisory. Indonesia's BNPB, the National Disaster Management Authority, maintains regional coordination capacity in North Maluku that can respond quickly if conditions escalate. This infrastructure of monitoring and response exists because the people who built it understand exactly what this region is. They understand that North Halmahera is the kind of place where, when a M6.2 aftershock sequence is underway, you do not wait for something larger before activating your awareness. You activate it immediately. You check the buildings around you for cracks. You know where your evacuation route goes. You know which way the slope of the land rises and where higher ground can be reached quickly if a shallow earthquake were to follow and generate a tsunami advisory. One more thing you need to know about the context of today's events, and it connects this M6 directly to one of the most important stories that has come out of this part of Indonesia in 2026, when the search and rescue teams were working on the slopes of Mount Dukono on the island of Halmahera in early May 2026, recovering the bodies of 3 hikers, including 2 Singaporean nationals, killed in a volcanic eruption on May 8th of this year. The base of operations for those rescue teams, the town where the North Halmahera Police Chief Erlikson Pasaribu coordinated with Indonesian search and rescue agency Basarnas, the town where the recovered bodies were transported to a hospital for formal identification before being repatriated to their families. That town was Tobelo. The same Tobelo that is 58 kilometers east of this morning's main shock epicenter. The same Tobelo whose residents felt the ground shift on Friday morning at 11:31 local time, and, in the words of Umar Abbas in Ternate, just 114 kilometers away, panicked for a moment because they are still traumatized by past earthquakes. This island, Halmahera, the largest island in the Maluku archipelago, an island whose name means motherland in the local language, an island that covers 17,180 square kilometers of tropical volcanic terrain, where 3 active volcanoes rise along the northern peninsula's mountain spine, where Dukono has been erupting almost continuously since 1933, where Mount Gamkanora reaches 1,635 meters above the sea, is one of the most geologically active pieces of land on the surface of this planet. It sits at the intersection of the Halmahera subduction zone and the Molucca sea collision zone. It generates volcanoes because the same subducting slab that produced this morning's intermediate depth M6. 2. Earthquake is also the heat and fluid source that feeds the magma chambers beneath those volcanic peaks. The earthquakes and the volcanoes on Halmahera are not separate phenomena. They are expressions of the same fundamental process: oceanic crust descending into the mantle, releasing water and heat, driving magma upward, deforming and fracturing the rock above it in ways that produce both eruptions and earthquakes, often from the same root cause, operating at different depths and different timescales. The people of North Halmahera Regency, all 207,723 of them as of mid-2025, live with this reality as the permanent background condition of their existence. The farmers tending coconut and clove plantations across the Regency's 55,000 hectares know that earthquakes come. The fishermen launching outrigger canoes from beaches near Tobelo know that the ground beneath the sea is not stable. The residents of Galela and Kau and Morotai, scattered across the northern peninsula and the surrounding islands, know what intermediate depth earthquakes feel like, know what shallow earthquakes feel like, know the difference between the two by the character of the shaking, the rolling, slow heave of a deep focus event versus the sharp, sudden jolt of a shallow, crustal rupture. This knowledge lives in the body before it ever lives in a seismogram. This morning's M6.2 at 120, 9 kilometers depth, 58 kilometers west of Tobelo, produced no confirmed casualties, no structural collapses, no tsunami, no infrastructure failures beyond what has been reported by the initial USGS assessment. The pager green alert reflects that. The single felt report submitted to Did You Feel It? In the immediate aftermath reflects that. The absence of damage reports in the first hours following the event reflects that. In a world where green alert to intermediate depth earthquakes happen in the Halmahera region with a regularity that puts them firmly within the expected seismic background of the area, today's M6. 2 is not a headline about devastation. It is a headline about a living, breathing, never-still tectonic environment where the forces that built these islands continue to operate, where the faults that shape the seafloor and the mountain spines of Halmahera are still active, and where a man sitting at a coffee stall in Ternate felt his chair move and thought for just a moment of everything that has happened in this place before. The Aftershock sequence from the M4. 6 event is continuing. The USGS seismic networks are recording. The BMKG stations across North Maluku are monitoring. The descending slab beneath the Molucca Sea is still moving at 107 millimeters per year, as it has been since long before humans were watching it, as it will continue to do long after today's data has been archived. The Halmahera subduction zone is not finished. It is not resting. It is not pausing. Today's events are part of its continuous and unbroken operation. And the people of Tobelo, of Galela, of Kau, of the northern peninsula villages, where houses lean toward the water and outrigger canoes are pulled above the tide line, will continue to live within it, checking their homes for cracks, watching the horizon, listening to the ground, knowing the difference between a small one and a not small one, and going back to their coffee when it turns out to be the kind that rocks the chair but leaves the walls standing. The sequence is still ongoing. The monitoring continues. And for everyone living on this island and in this region, the week ahead begins with one certainty. The earth beneath North Maluku has not said everything it has to say.